All right. Well, it's the new year. Yeah. Western New Year, and we're live right now.
Morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Yeah. We had a rousing experience last night. Lots of sounded like a war zone to me. I think it was because of how the Hermitage is located in the valley. It's just like gets all these reverberations. So there was
Fireworks.
explosions, fireworks. Yeah, there were fireworks. Or you think there were fireworks. I mean, we're not 100% sure.
We didn't see them.
Didn't see them. But yeah, it just kept going, and then it like quieted down till midnight, and then it kind of exploded again at midnight.
Yeah, 8 p.m. was when there was the first major round of...
Yeah.
Our New Year's parties are much less exciting here than they were when we were lay people.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't really acknowledge the New Year very much, but...
Yeah, usually, I mean, at Abhayagiri or monasteries in Thailand, you know, there's a tradition of people staying up till midnight and then doing itipiso chanting. So there's like the homage to the triple gem, where the Pali formula is itipiso bhagava arahang samma sambuddho. And you recite 9 different qualities of the Buddha, and then 6 different qualities of the Dhamma, 8 or so qualities of the Sangha, and you just repeat that 108 times. And
3 hours about.
It can be about 3 hours, depending on how fast you go. I was at one monastery where we chanted it in about an hour and 20 minutes.
Was that at Abhayagiri?
No,
that was at Wat Phakram in Bangkok.
I remember you used to always post little things in the cabinet like, I'm going to be doing 108 tonight.
That's right.
And then people would come in and out.
Yeah.
That was always a bit humorous because some people felt slightly aversive to it, others not.
That's right. When we had chanting at these Western monasteries at Abhayagiri, it's a special. We have a special place for the chanters, which is separate from the sitters. So.
But I think when it's been done, like as a like everyone has to do it, I've heard that some people walk out. They just get a bit. It's really hard. You know, you're chanting this over and over and over again, the same chant. So you have to have some patience.
Have you had it be mandatory at a Western monastery?
There was one monastery where it was done. I think maybe some of the senior monks were gone, and one of the particular senior monk. I don't know if I was there for it. I wasn't there for it, is what I'd heard about. So some of the other monks were. They weren't into it. They weren't into it so much.
It's intense.
Yeah.
It's intense.
It can be pretty long. 3 hours.
Regardless, we're happy to be entering the new year with all of you. It's been lovely to be sort of taken into this community as always. So we're enjoying the live streams and just seeing people. It's pretty nice.
Yeah,
so,
just seeing there's 20 people right now, and it's New Year's morning at 7 a.m. That's pretty amazing.
Impressive.
Dedication to Dhamma. So we're still talking about the theme of liking, wanting to be liked, and praise, avoiding blame, and how pervasive that is, how that's such a normal experience. I liked how, I think you were talking about the tribal experience, or did you start with that last week? Kind of the feeling of being, you want to be part of a group and, not extricated from a group. And so there's just almost a innate feeling, like biological feeling, like you don't want to be separated so much. I mean, that's a lot of what our rules and even our way of life has to do with, is like group culture. So that's something. It's something. One of the things I was thinking about this morning in regards to it is there might be a sort of blaming as to why I want to be liked, because we might feel this strong feeling like I should be someone who is liked by others, who other people appreciate and they think highly of, and when we're not, we often blame ourselves for that notion. Whereas it's just such a pervasive feeling of wanting to have a sense of like, I must be liked by others, or I should have some praise, or at least I should be regarded well, or I want to be regarded well. And then when we're not, there's this blame that there's something wrong with us for feeling that way. Whereas I think it's just such a normal experience, even though as Buddhists we're trying to really transcend that. We're trying to essentially not care so much about kind of the notion of what others think of us, unless we're moving in the other direction of kind of making it so people are uninspired, or we're kind of bringing people's kind of the sense of Dhamma needs to be upheld. We have to think about how we're actually uplifting people's understanding of the Dhamma, and we don't want to denigrate that at all.
Yeah, and I mean, it speaks to what you're talking about. Speaks to the question which someone asked in a live chat at the very end of the last session, which is how we, how we end up dealing with this in a Dhammic way, and what perception we apply to this worldly wind of being liked and disliked, and the questioner spoke of the culture that she came from, which I believe was an Asian culture, where when one was subject to harsh speech or criticism, one looked at it as their past karma, and that this sort of helped them accept it. And she asked if this was a skillful view or one in line with the Dhamma. So what are your venerable opinions on this question?
As to whether it's skillful, I mean, part of that question is like the result. So like if thinking in that way, if thinking, this has something to do with past actions that I've done. If by thinking in that way, it leads to being able to accept it and being able to like let go of it and not be like thrown around by attaching to that, then it's skillful to that extent. Whether or not it's true, or to what extent it's true, is something which is much more difficult to answer. And I don't think that it's necessarily in the Buddhist, the Pali Theravada canon, that there's always a tit for tat. So if person X, yells at me for something that I didn't do, it's not necessarily the case that 3 lifetimes ago I yelled at former person X in the exact same way. It's not karma is not tit for tat in a Theravada Pali understanding.
And also the whole idea of sort of being punished for a previous action is based on this idea of the being who did that action in your past being the same being that is here experiencing that action, sort of a continuity, and therefore you're being punished for it. And I think sometimes it really can help, applying that perception can help accept like a difficult situation if instead of punishment, you can sort of think of it as, if in some case there is a certain correspondence, so if you did something unskillful towards someone else, in a way, this is the universe mirroring what that would be like to be on the receiving end so that you never do it again. And in that way, it's a compassionate lesson shaping you into a better person. But I think, that it's problematic also to think of it, this being is the same being, because then what you do see happen in cultures is that applied to others. And, if someone's suffering, it quickly becomes something that can be, if held immaturely, a source of kind of blaming and saying like, look, this person deserves what's coming to them. And I think in that case, it can be helpful to apply a different perception that, actually there is continuity in karma, but these aren't necessarily the same beings. The Buddha was very clear that there's this continuity, but it's not necessarily the same being. He avoided that whole ontological realm. He said there are conditions and there are results. And so I think that gives us some wiggle room in terms of which perception we apply, depending on what's skillful. So, so one perception you can also apply is all the goodness you're doing now is a gift to a future being. And whether or not you consider that you depends on what's kind of skillful in the moment. But I do think we have wiggle room, and it really comes down to us like holding this view maturely, because the Buddha was clear that there isn't necessarily a being behind this, there's just dependent origination. And that gives us a little bit of, I think, ability to work with it skillfully, maybe, but it can be interesting.
I was thinking, because it's so easy to personalize something and to make a self out of it. And so if we're actually using these kind of ways of thinking that's sort of bolstering the sense of self, then it's not skillful. So I think it goes back to what both of you are saying, which is is essentially, like how skillful is something that you're using, how helpful is it for you, and you have to really investigate and look. And so, holding a particular way of thinking about something might not be skillful. It might sound theoretically like, oh, that would work. Thinking about karma in this way is helpful, but then it just might not be. So one has to really investigate that. I mean, one of the problems with this, again, we come back to view. And if you hold the view, as you were talking about, there's like a tit for tat, where there's this being that's getting affected by it. We don't really know that. That's not the Buddha's teachings. The Buddha didn't teach that everything was karma. In fact, there's quite a beautiful sutta where he explains there's 7 reasons for the arising of karma based on, I think it's feeling. And since every experience has feeling within it, Vedana, therefore we're saying that every experience we have is not necessarily based on karma. It could be based on some of these other factors, which could be like environmental factors or factors related to your body, things that you don't really have control of and that don't have to do with your past karma. So I just was thinking that view that you take can also be obstructive to you if you take an absolutist, like everything I experience is due to my own karma. And the Buddha actually thought that was wrong view. That's what he said.
Yeah, and I think that's great. I'd never thought about it in this way, but I think you could think about basically like extrapolating from what you're saying is like, so praise and blame, depending on how we respond to it, like skillfully or unskillfully, you could have 4 different results. So we're blamed and we take it unskillfully. So that's someone comes in and yells at us, and then we just, return that with anger, and then just have the whatever spicy retort. And then another situation, someone blames us, and then we take it in a wholesome way. We, possibly take it like the questioner who says, okay, this is my karma, for whatever that means. So I'm not going to respond with anger and kind and learn a lesson from this. Or there's, someone praises us and we don't, and we respond unskillfully, and that make a self out of it, and like, oh yeah, I really am the best, and I don't need to practice, and kind of just get lax, like you're saying, or praised and then respond well, and like, okay, maybe there's some truth to that, maybe not, but I should live up to that. I think it's a worthy thing. Whatever that person is praising, it's praiseworthy. So I'm going to try to live up to it. So, it depends on how we respond to these things. They're not inherently good or bad, the praise or the blame. It's like, just like the wind. The wind isn't inherently good or bad. It's, it does what it does.
Yeah, and it just shows it's not like an equation. You can't like apply an algorithm to how you respond to each situation. So in certain situations you might respond with praising yourself in some certain way, and another you might think, oh well, actually this is something that's good for me to look at or understand. So there's all kinds of different ways that we can apply a reaction that in a certain situation it's not always even right. There can be if I had done it this way, maybe that would have had a different skillful result or not. So there's so many ways that we can kind of meet these kind of worldly winds and and apply a skillfulness to it. So it's it's rife with a lot of work and effort, I think, in terms of viewing it in the right way.
But it's not an easy thing. The Buddha devoted a whole book of the Samyutta Nikaya to praise, like to what is it, the dangers of fame, and just acknowledging the power of that wind, and so, yeah.
There's one, just on a related note, something which I've noticed in my own life is just like you could call it like the present life comic effects of fault finding. So like I went through a period, it was basically at the early part of my monastic life. I come to the monastery. Before that, I was like a normal happy-go-lucky kind of guy, and then I start like reading the Buddhist Vinaya, basically all the monks' rules, and I'm like, oh, the Buddha, praised this and said monks shouldn't be, sloppy in this way. And then I start looking around outside and then really externalizing this view of what's right and what's wrong. And it caused a lot of suffering for myself. And, I externalized that, it's almost like my eyes were burning, just like lighting fires around on my brother monks, for the first several years in the monastery, and then really having that pointed out to me, like both by others and just seeing it more myself and just seeing the pain in it. But the comic effects are that for one who has spent a lot of time fault finding, is that after that you become paranoid, thinking that other people are finding fault with you. And that paranoia is, you could say, a direct like comic effect from you finding fault with others.
No, and I think we can be wary of applying this perception of all bad, criticism and such coming from previous action, because there's, some problems with applying that in every situation, but it can be really helpful in terms of making you quite careful with your current actions. And I think you're right, like the fault finding and what that does to your mind later, it's significant. And then, the Buddha also laid out these effects for the other 4 types of wrong speech. Like if one engages in divisive speech, I believe it leads to the breaking of friendships. If one lies, it leads to not being believed. If one engages in frivolous chatter, it leads to having words which aren't taken seriously. Forgot the last one. Either way, it's a good reminder to be careful. So, there is use for those recollections of that side.
It's beautiful that there's like these principles, because again, when we want to think about like specifics, like, well, I must have done something to this person in my past life, it doesn't really necessarily hold as much water as this principle, that the principles you just listed that the Buddha was talking about. So like we can't see like, well, why would I want to be divided from friendships? Or we can see like, well, if this is the consequence of my divisive speech, then you can actually apply that principle and say like, I don't want to be divorced from my friends.
Yeah.
But I do agree with you that one of the things you can see where there seems to clearly be a link around is like specifically criticizing others, and then you get that kind of sense back of like, it's almost immediate, like the sense at the same time of being like worried about what others think about you. And so I do find like it's a very common trait in the monastery to engage in fault finding. You essentially are abandoning a lot of entertainment and things that were sort of interesting and enjoyable in lay life, and so you kind of look around and what else can you do but kind of see like, well, this guy's not doing that and that guy's not doing this and it says to do that, and they call this like wielding the wrong Dhamma weapon, I think. Or actually I would call it that, but like, yeah, it's just like you have your Dhamma weapons, you're like, well, the Buddha said all these things and none of these people are practicing it, so they're clearly not following the path. But then you look at yourself and it's that whole we talk about this metaphor of like pointing the finger. You have 3 fingers pointing back at you. I've used that before, and many people have. So it's always forgetting that there's these 3 fingers that are actually continuing to point back. We have to look at our own experience of what it is that we're actually doing.
Right.
Because most of us will find that we are holier than thou, and it's just it's so much more helpful to just look at our own behavior. And the Buddha does really explain so many times, like, don't focus on others, don't focus on other people. There's only one sutta, I think, where he says from time to time you can do it, but only a little bit.
Yeah.
I also thank you, Ajahn,
Yeah,
and I agree. We'll also someone Doug Robnett / Sarah Conover brought up the fact that
Mom and Dad
can ask to elaborate on the 4th type of karma, but I'd be curious about the Venerables' opinion on this neither black nor white dark nor light karma. Thoughts, Ajahn Kovilo?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm attending this Dharma Realm Buddhist University, which is a Mahayana university, and we spent the first part of last semester basically going over Theravada texts, and for the most part, so much of the Pali Canon is really, the Buddha encouraging, both monastic and lay disciples to cultivate the light and to abandon the dark. And that's, I think, for most people, when you come to a spiritual path, whether it's Buddhism or any other, like that's what is easy to do. It's easy to it's easier to get one's mind around what that means. Giving up what's unwholesome and practicing what's wholesome. Whereas the transcending both of those, not doing transcending the good and the bad, that's a bit more tricky, and that comes up a lot in Mahayana texts like the Prajna Paramita Sutra. There is no suffering, no accumulation, no extinction, no way. There is no attaining and no cessation, etc. And so I have been averse to it in the past, this kind of language, like, oh, it just opens the door for not paying attention to virtue and just like doing whatever you want and saying it's neither light nor dark, not really transcending these things, but just kind of wallowing in them. But I think there is a positive side, which you can do right now. It's not just the kama of last moment attaining nibbana. Certainly that would be neither light nor dark. And Buddhas and Arhants, engage in neither light nor dark kama, but actually light nor dark action. But I think in the present moment you can do it as well. Like if you shift your mind state in a certain way.
I've always seen it a bit more as, for me, that level that the Prajna Paramita Sutta gets at, that is the transcending all good and evil, is almost a third tier. For me, I've always considered that sutta speaking very much about, like, in the Majjhima Nikaya, I think it's 117, the Buddha talks about, he goes through each factor of the path and says there's the worldly right view, for example, which results in acquisition, which results in accumulation. And he does that with right action, right speech. And then he says there's transcendent or supramundane right view, which is the right view of one endowed with the factors of the path and cultivating the noble path. So I've always considered it a little more basic, like when you speak about, the worldly level of right view, which I assume in this case might be light kama. I've always thought it was more like just someone gives something and so they get wealth back. Whereas the neither light nor dark kama would be more that transcendent or supramundane level of each of those path factors, which was leading one towards the end of kama. So any one of these factors or actions, when imbued with right view in a way that makes it part of the path, for me, that's what it was sort of speaking of. And then every condition that one receives can be transformed into condition for the path, for awakening. And I think you see that in the lives of so many of the great teachers. They go through great suffering, but that suffering becomes a cause for their liberation. And for me, that level of sort of transcendent completely, that, say, the Prajna Paramita Sutta, is almost like that's where you'd get to after the path had been fully cultivated and transcended almost. Not that you couldn't step into it at times as well, I think. But I also see a problem with, like you said, like if you interpret it in that way of like letting go of all distinctions and categories, I mean, that leads to bad places quite quickly, or it can if you're not careful. So I've always found it much more safe to just consider it the Eightfold Path almost, personally.
Yeah, I mean, we have to, there is a sense of like abandoning ideologies, abandoning like kind of everything is, we try to almost do away with categories and trying to see things in sort of mechanical ways. And but at the same time, we are using skillful means in terms of trying to understand, what is it that we're doing, what are our actions, and trying to examine them. Because sometimes like what feels right is not always, or is often not good. It's often like hurts you. It can hurt you or hurt another person. But when we're like kind of looking at good and bad decisions and whatnot, it's not always clear, even whether we've made the right choice around things, and we have to kind of wait almost and stew in them and kind of feel, is this the right choice I made, or is this how do we really establish what's good and bad? It's not such an easy distinction to make.
And so you're talking about the light and the dark specifically.
Yeah.
Either one of those.
Yeah. So it's just that the way that we look at actions, I think, is quite important, because it can sometimes, to me, it just seems like it can appear oversimplistic. How we're categorizing and looking at like what was actually a benefit or what wasn't a benefit, what was good for us, what was bad for another person, or whatnot. And we can actually bring that up in a way that doesn't quite hit the mark. It's like, or we make an assumption, oh, I really hurt him, I shouldn't have done that, and then actually we said something to another person that changed their life. So it's just kind of paying attention to these things, and also like, you can have an ideal also of like kind of eradication of just all distinctions in your understanding, like of what really is good and bad, and we talk about like deconstructionism and trying to see like how categories work, but just trying to, I guess what I'm trying to introduce is just really an examination of not being sure, really not always being sure about how it is that we see our actions and what it is that they have actually done or not done.
That's healthy.
Yeah.
It's on that note, I mean, just on the note of like thinking about the lightness of light karma and the darkness of dark karma, like, and how we distinguish that. I think it's worthwhile to note that, like, in a Buddhist context, the Buddha was very clear about karma is intention. So I think we're really fortunate to have had that clarification, because, yeah, for many people, like, and it's good for us to consider, like, what are the effects of our actions. But if I say something with like a pure heart, and then the person who I'm talking to misunderstands it and is very hurt by that, although it's too bad that they're hurt, and I can take a lesson from that, learning that I need to speak more skillfully, that's not actually necessarily dark karma for me.
No.
If I was very clear about my intention, that it was a bright intention, and yeah, if the person is hurt, then it's
definitely
it's not
food for
irrelevant.
Contemplation,
Yeah.
for
Food
future
for
action
contemplation.
and
Yes.
wisdom, but
Exactly.
it doesn't.
And it especially goes back to this whole liking thing of like wanting to be liked. And so you say something and you were almost inspired by your own speech, what you said, and then somebody comes back with a retort of like, how could you say that to me? It's so unkind. And you had just this welling of kindness in your heart maybe come up towards that person. And, we want to then blame ourselves. And it's important, we want to not forget that we're establishing a base of awareness and understanding within our own mind. And so however we're perceiving things, we are trying to rise above a level of this kind of like these winds that affect us. Yeah. And so, the more that we are paying attention to Sila, Samadhi, and Panya within ourselves, stabilizing our own minds, then these winds aren't going to have such an effect on us. So we say something and we know that we had a good intention around it, and then somebody doesn't recognize that. The result is, again, we don't want to take it personally how we take that. Because it's not, it's not up to us, like whether we're a very sensitive person or not. But again, like with practicing the Dhamma, just there's a stability that eventually takes place that one can just ride those waves, and it becomes easier and easier.
And that speaks a lot to what Merriam-Webster just brought up with doesn't karma require a sense of self? So neither light nor dark karma would speak to actions undertaken without a sense of self. And so Ajahn Junda, I take some of what you're saying as like what we are, as we come deeper and deeper into the practice, actions begin to be undertaken with, based on something that isn't necessarily completely dependent on this sort of constricted sense of self. There becomes this other basis of action, intention, and motivation, which feels somewhat impersonal and powerful. And I really agree with that. And Shelley up above was speaking about how also it's not, she was sort of asking about, is the goal of this practice then just to sort of flatten experience between praise and blame? And I'd say that there's a place for equanimity, but that as we transcend these worldly winds, the experience is not one of flattening, but rather of a deeper grounding in something that is much more vibrant, true, and resonant to a transcendent part of ourselves which isn't affected by these worldly winds. But the word flattening, for me at least, doesn't speak to the power and nourishment of that refuge of the triple gem. And I very much have the same experience. Like, as you deepen into the practice, something in your heart, or chitta, or whatever you want to call it, begins to be a guide in a way that is not completely dependent on some constricted sense of self. And for me, that is a good measure of what karma is being undertaken from a place of neither dark nor light, personally.
Yeah, flattening is not a very inspiring concept in a sense.
But it is interesting, you know, the more we delve into practice, then, you know, the more that, like, our, as you were talking about, the chitta, or you know, our experience of awareness, really, it sort of mellows out how it is that we are in the world, so that when we are approached by difficulties, then it just becomes easier and easier as time unfolds.
Yeah.
Because we've kind of surrendered ourselves, or we've kind of put our faith into the Buddha's teachings, into the Eightfold Path, and that's like sort of, it just starts to ground one. So it's like almost like imagining one's just like a pole that's going deeper and deeper into the earth, and it's just in the movability of oneself in terms of the mind just becomes less and less. So it's that grounding of our own practice that just helps so much in terms of establishing ourselves in a place where we're just not moved so much.
I think it's a good simile, and it kind of raises the question, which a couple of people are like hinting at, like, and we're touching on directly, like, is it possible for us to undertake karma, which is neither bright nor dark, like right now, as that being a path to enlightenment? And I don't think the suttas are clear enough to give a definitive answer what the Buddha specifically meant in this particular sutta. It's very cut and dry, but there are certainly, like, it's probably like a conservative understanding, traditional understanding of that sutta, that it is an arhat. It is like an enlightened being who is able to, like, engage in this karma, which is neither bright nor dark. But I will say that one kind of helpful way of thinking about, like, the path, practicing the path, it's not like the path is, you know, every step we take in meditation, every breath we take in meditation, every moment that we're aware, that's like pure, neither bright nor dark. We're totally transcendent mind, totally, you know, open natural awareness type thing. But it's light karma, which is inclining us towards this neither bright nor dark karma. This is karma that's taking us to the end of karma. This is light karma, which is taking us to neither light nor dark karma. This is karma which is going to transcend karma.
Yeah, it's like the suffering that leads to the end of suffering. It's sort of what we engage in a particular way rises above that distinction. Is that what you're trying to say? In terms of the light karma that leads to the end of both light and dark karma.
Well, they're the same in that it's like an opposite, you know, or, you know, skillful means leading to an end.
Right. Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, the meditation doesn't have to be, you know, the dukkha that leads to the end of the dukkha, in a certain sense. But
yeah, I mean, I certainly find the distinction, you know, if say, you know, if we take the neither dark nor light karma as the sort of something that an arahant has access to, although even an arahant engaging in karma, I think, would be a problematic concept.
Yeah.
Actually. And I think in this sutta that it does speak about something about that neither dark nor light being karma leading to the end of karma. But regardless, for me, there is that sutta around Majjhima Nikaya 117 around, like, these two levels of each path factor of worldly resulting in acquisition versus that which is a path factor. That's a useful distinction. Putting aside that other sutta completely, like, that's one that I can get my hands on easily, because I know when I can give from a place of, say, wanting to get return or wanting to endear myself to someone. Or I can do each of these. I can do many good actions, but without completely right view. I know there's a lot of this in some places about people doing good because they want, future gains in future lives, or, there's a whole movement in Thailand where people could sort of buy their future plot in heaven by giving a monthly donation to this one organization of like, $10 a month. For me, that's very much good action, but it's undertaken on a very worldly level, resulting in acquisition. Whereas we can undertake each of these actions. I think the Buddha says one of the highest ways of giving is as an ornament of the mind, or because when one gives, it brings the mind to serenity. And I think if we look at all our actions as these ornaments of the mind or means towards awakening, then not only every action can become, in line with that, but also every situation has a Dhammic path from it, I think. So that's a useful distinction for me to look at one or the other, I think.
I just wanted to ask, do either of you find that, like, when you are aware of, like, engaging in something like giving or kindness or a skillful action, do you find that arises often spontaneously, or that there's any kind of relative degree that the spontaneity of that has to do with, like a non-calculated approach, like as you're doing good, as you're engaging in good action? Like for me, I tend to have, it's more spontaneous, or I feel like something comes up in a positive way. It's not like a calculated approach. It's just, oh, this is the right thing to do. This is helpful. Rather like, okay, as we're talking about acquisition, what am I going to get out of this? Or what's the right thing to do? Because again, a self often arises out of that. Like, how am I going to benefit from being generous or whatnot? Whereas, like, oftentimes I find that the spontaneous act of just giving or doing something for somebody else, it just arises out of me, out of the ether, of like goodness that kind of shines through. And the self factor goes away. It's sort of like, oh, there's not this kind of closing down of like, what's in it for me? How am I going to get this? And I didn't know if you also found the same, like that kind of, there is a difference I find when I want to do something that's positive, but it's not spontaneous. And it's sort of like that, because of that filter, there's something in there that's like almost fighting against the goodness or the ability to engage in something that's good.
I don't think they have to be mutually exclusive. Like, I think even if something is planned, so like in Thailand, say you live near a monastery, monks are going to come by your house every morning at 6 o'clock. And by come by your house in Thailand, I mean, they're literally going to walk by your house and not stop, and if you're there waiting for them, you can put something in their bowl. But if, you're not there, then they'll just pass by your house. It's not like they're, soliciting or anything. But, if you have a plan, okay, the monks are going to come by, I'm going to be there. Like, that can be your plan. And this is like resolution time. So I think a lot of people in Thailand and in Theravada Buddhist countries where monks do go alms round, I think to some degree at New Year's, but also like at the beginning of the rains retreat, we'll say, okay, for the rest of these 3 months, I'm going to offer alms every day. And, there aren't as many monks in America. It's not, there aren't monks wandering the streets everywhere. But like, having, okay, I'm going to give, a weekly donation to cause X or organization Y because I want to. And that's a planning. But I think there can come spontaneity within that.
Oh, yeah.
So like, the woman or the man who offers alms every morning to the monks, they might not be inspired every single time they take a ball of sticky rice and put it in a monk's bowl, but they might be. It might, some days it might hit and other days it might not. And I think there is a place for like planning out good deeds, and if spontaneity comes as well, all the better. But I think trying to rely on spontaneity as being the, only the pure is worthwhile then.
And I think it's especially relevant during New Year's Day. I mean, you speak about like this is resolution time, and these are like people do plan these things out. And so, I mean, it's a good recollection today. And we'd spoken about, say, the Sarania pledge a few sessions back where, basically people wouldn't eat until they'd given. And then, there are versions of that one could sort of maybe not strictly determine, but really make an intention for today and for the year around trying to give something every day, or something like that. But, and like Ajahn Kovilo said, like at the beginning of the Rains retreat, it's very common for people in Thailand, say, to make a determination to keep the 5 precepts as well as they can, or something like that. And the Buddha, when he gave advice about giving, when people asked where should one give, he was very careful about preserving the sense of freedom around that. He would respond almost every time with saying, give where one feels inspired. And so I think, if people want to sort of take today as a chance to really make one of these beautiful intentions somewhat solid, it's a good opportunity. And, I know for me, it's not every day that there are days where I'm not terribly enthusiastic about my monastic life, at every moment. But I think steering your lives by those moments of clarity is how we keep it in line with the Dhamma. So to sort of, to make those intentions and plan from that spot is a good thing to do. And today is one opportunity to do that, perhaps.
It's not too late. It's 7:43. Even if you've broken most of the precepts already this morning, you can start again.
Still have a lot of
It'd be impressive if they managed that already.
But that's that power of adhitthana, I think, that comes in where it does allow that flexibility. Because when you make a promise to yourself, I'm going to do something, then you have a sense of like, oh, okay, what is it that is possible for me in this moment to let go of? So then you have that kind of that mind that's there, like kind of working with something, that you might not want to give, or you might want to set yourself back from. My own sense is more, I guess I wasn't being so clear as much with the spontaneity as that it just feels better. It just feels better when there's something that's spontaneous, and rather than kind of planned out. And I'm not sure if I would say inferior, that planning is inferior, but there seems to be some sort of calculating that gets involved. But I wouldn't say it's negligent, like it's not. So I do think also, though, in general, if you step back from all of that and you make a promise, like what we're talking about, like a pledge or a promise, then throughout the day you have kind of ways you're going to meet with that in a very kind of examining way. How you're looking at your own mind, like, oh, I don't want to give, oh, but I should, and what am I holding on to? And then when you finally do give, like when we were talking about that pen, or my not giving you my jacket, and like when I gave that pen, it was like, oh yeah, it was something that I just knew, like, well, this would be better for me, and then I gave it, right. Whereas the jacket, I knew this isn't going to be better for me. I should keep it.
But it's not too late for Ajahn Chunda to give me his jacket.
It could
still
still
have all of
happen.
It might
2021.
happen, but probably won't. So anyway,
I don't need a jacket. I don't need a jacket. I've got many jackets. Yeah.
You just don't mind. So it's 7:45 right now, and we are coming to the end of our Hermitage Conversations dialogue this morning. We do have...
Not forever, just for today.
Yeah, just today. We do have a sutta now for next week that's been posted, the discourse at Kosambi. And so if people want to look at that, that'll be... do you want to say anything further about that?
Oh, it's a amazing sutta on the 6 sort of conditions for harmony, and especially elaborating right view. That comes from it's a very inspiring sutta from a very uninspiring moment, where I think the Buddhist monks at Kosambi were arguing about, basically one monk didn't flush the toilet and it issued into this huge thing. So the Buddha
that's what we fight about.
Yeah, we do. It's like every day. Who was it? Who was it? Who did it? Who can I blame? And who can I praise? Because I'm always flushing the toilet.
We're happy about that.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so we will see you next Tuesday evening. All right, be well.
6:30.